Welcome, everyone, to free GMAT Prep Hour with me, Avi Gutman, on May 31st, 2018. What I'd like to talk to you all about today is how do we most effectively study for this test at home, and how important the mindset is. And perhaps most importantly, how do I manage my time on test day? How do I make sure that I don't run out of time? And how do I not let that affect my performance? So before we get started, just we'll show you this slide for a few seconds. So if you want to learn more about the different options for studying for the GMAT, you can visit this link here at the bottom. And here is the table of content of what we're going to cover today. I should mention there is a chat box, which I will check occasionally. But if you have any questions that you want to make sure that I answer, please use the Q&A feature that I have at the top of my screen. I think you might have it in the bottom of your screens. So I'll describe what I mean by front-end work versus back-end work. I'm actually going to start describing that right now, and then we're going to see some examples of actual GMAT questions to illustrate what I mean by front-end work versus back-end work. So when you get a GMAT problem, pops up on the computer screen, middle of the test, front-end work is where you read the text, or if it's algebra, then you read the algebra, and you want to do that very, very slowly and very thoughtfully. So don't just read the words that you're seeing, but also ask yourself, what do those words mean? For example, if the first sentence of a problem says, the average of 5 numbers is 6. The mistake that a lot of people make is that they'll just keep reading. And instead, what you should do is pause and say, well, if I have 5 numbers and their average is 6, then their sum must be 30. This is just a result of the definition of the word average. If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see what I mean. So that's called an inference. The GMAT told me one thing. It told me that there are 5 numbers and their average is 6. I'm now making an inference based on what the GMAT told me. And now I know the sum of those 5 numbers is 30. So all of that would be considered front-end work. And in many cases, I'll spend very close to the 2 minutes. If you're new to the GMAT, you should know there's on average 2 minutes per question, approximately. I'll often use almost the entire 2 minutes just to do this front-end work. If you do the front-end work well, the back-end work tends to go very fast on the GMAT. And by fast, I mean it could be instantaneous. So by the time you finish reading the word problem and get to the question mark, often I'll already have the answer in front of me. I will have accidentally answered the question before I even knew what the question was going to ask. So in those cases, the back-end work is 0 seconds. And in other cases, it might take a bit longer. It might take 20 seconds or even 30 seconds. But it's very rare for the back-end work to take more than half a minute. And I think what messes a lot of people up is that they kind of assume that the back-end work will take much longer than it actually will. And because of that, they rush through the front-end work. They rush reading the question. They don't pause to make the inferences. And because of that, they end up having to spend a lot more time on the back end, which then just reinforces their belief that the back end should take a long time. So that's the difference between front-end work and back-end work. We'll see a couple of examples in a bit. I also want to talk about how to study most effectively at home. And maybe I'll ask for some participation in the chat box for this. Let me know, let all of us know in the chat box, please. When you're practicing GMAT questions at home, what are you hoping for? Are you hoping to get them right, or are you hoping to get them wrong? Let us know in the chat box. What's the optimal outcome? What will make you happy at home? So thank you to those of you who typed up your answers. It looks like there's a pretty strong agreement among you that we're hoping to get the questions right at home. And I'm going to tell you that that's not good. That is not good for the GMAT. Because let's say you did a question at home and you got it right. Well, at the end of that question, you're not smarter than you were before you did that question. You're exactly the same person. You haven't grown. Your conceptual understanding of whatever they're testing there has not evolved. It's exactly the same as it was before the question. How do I know? Well, because you got it right. So you must have already known how to solve that question. How is your GMAT score going to go up if you're getting the questions right already? Then that's all of those are missed opportunities. Your GMAT score won't move. So I want to pause here because it's just such an important point, and I want to see in the chat box if you have any reactions to what I just said. Let me know if that sounds completely crazy to you, or if that makes sense, or if you have any questions on that. Why do I prefer to make mistakes when I'm at home? Because mistakes are the only way that I can improve. And the reason why the better you do on the GMAT, the harder it is to do even better. So for example, if you're already getting a 720, it's much harder to go from 720 to 730 than it is to go from, say, 600 to 610. Why? Well, if you're already scoring 720, you don't make a lot of mistakes. So you're at home and you're doing question after question after question, you're getting them right. And so it's not pushing your score up. It becomes much harder to get mistakes. The mistakes are the things that help us grow as test takers and as individuals. The mistakes are what makes us smarter. So that's what I mean when I say mindset. Okay, the mindset has to be at home when you're testing, when you're practicing. The mindset has to be, I'm looking forward to the mistakes. I hope that I'll make mistakes. And when I do make a mistake, I'm going to celebrate. Like, this is a huge moment for me. And what I see a lot of students doing instead is whenever they make a mistake, they quickly check the solution to see why there was a mistake. And then they go, oh, yeah, okay, no big deal. It was just a careless error. And they move on and never look at that question ever again. So instead of celebrating and making a big deal out of the mistake and learning something from it, instead of all of that, they just kind of brush it off, no big deal, and they forget it ever happened. What a waste. What a wasted opportunity. I mean, that was your moment. That was your moment to push your GMAT score up. You blew it, right? So it's very important to understand that the mistakes at home are almost your only opportunities to push your GMAT score up. If you do get a question right at home, maybe you should spend some more time on it. Maybe there's another way you could have solved it that's better. Maybe you got it right, but you got lucky. Maybe you got it right, but it took you more than 2 minutes. And even if you had to do a similar question again in the future, it would still take more than 2 minutes. You might as well have gotten it wrong. Getting a question right in over 2 minutes means you got it wrong. So keep that in mind as well. Okay. I want to talk for a bit about number 3 as well. Should I always time myself? Let me know in the chat box how you're currently operating when you're practicing GMAT questions at home. Are you timing yourself every time? Do you stop yourself around 2 minutes, or are you not using a timer yet? I just want to see what different people are doing. Okay, so one of you is saying you'll do an entire section in the appropriate amount of time, and then you just want to make sure that you finish the section on time. So that would mean you're timing yourself. Many others here are not timing yourself. Let's see here, Elaine, I time myself and stop myself at 2 minutes and take a guess. After that, I try to solve it after the 2 minutes. All right, Gloria does timed sets. So that's similar to what Ragini, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Ragini does. Hi, Erwin, welcome. Okay, so I want to give you all my best advice on this really important question. Should I time myself or not? And it ties really nicely into number 2, the front-end work versus back-end work. What happens to a lot of people when they time themselves is the presence of the timer causes them to rush the front-end work and spend much more time on the back-end work. If that's happening to you, and so I'm specifically talking here to Elaine and to Ragini and to, there was one other person who does timed sets, and it was Gloria. If that happens to you, stop using a timer, because what the timer is doing to you right now is it's reinforcing this terrible habit of rushing the front end and spending more time on the back end. It's a terrible habit. So if you don't mind, Gloria and Ragini and Elaine, is that, so Elaine is already saying that happens to you. Who else? Does that happen to you as well, Gloria? Does the presence of the timer cause you to rush the front end? And Ragini, yeah. Then don't use a timer. You're not ready for the timer yet. You're going to need to use a timer eventually, right? But first, I need to build a really strong habit of, I'm gonna take a deep breath, I'm gonna enjoy the front end work, I'm gonna pause and make inferences, I'm going to read very carefully, I'm gonna be very thoughtful about the situation that is being described here. And then the back end work should be very quick. Now, what happens if you do the best job that you can do on the front end, and then you get to the back end and you're not exactly sure how to finish this off, or you think, well, I could solve it, but I'm going to need another minute or minute and a half. Then what? Well, that's how you know the question was too hard for you. And if any of you are new to the GMAT, I should mention it's a computer adaptive test, which effectively means that the number of questions you answer correctly and incorrectly is irrelevant. I'm going to repeat that because that's very surprising to a lot of people. I've seen people score 730, getting half the questions right and half the questions wrong. I've seen people score 400, getting half the questions right and half the questions wrong. So how can you get a 400 or a 730 and in both cases have the same number of mistakes? Well, welcome to computer adaptive tests. That's the GMAT. So it's very important to be able to let go of questions when they are too hard for you. But in order to do that, you have to be able to recognize when they are too hard for you. How do you recognize when they're too hard for you? You take your sweet time enjoying the front end work. And then you look at the back end work and say, well, is this something that I can finish off in half a minute or not? And if not, then I know this question was too hard for me. I'm going to guess and move on. Any questions so far about any of this? If you want to take a practice test and you still haven't built the habit of taking your time on the front end sufficiently, then my recommendation is you start the practice test from question number 6. So the first 5 questions, you're just going to pick B, 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 B on those first 5 questions. And the reason that I think that's a good idea is because if you're starting from question number 6, you're not going to feel so pressed for time. And the hope is that then you'll still be able to enjoy that front end and take your time on it without falling into that trap of rushing the front end and spending your time on the back end. I got a question from Devinder about computer adaptive tests. Can you be more specific about the question, Devinder? What would you like to know? I guess how it works, or why does it not matter the number of questions you get right? Is that your question? How to handle. So it's very different from the tests you would have had in college, in that in college the questions are usually all worth the same number of points. So if you had 20 questions, each question is worth 5% of the score typically. And some of the questions are easier and some of the questions are harder. That's the way that it was in college. And the easier questions really were easier. There weren't any trap answers. They weren't trying to trick you in college. The easier questions were truly easy. On the GMAT, on the other hand, the way the scoring algorithm works is such that the easier a question is, the more important it is to your score. And the harder a question is, the less impact it will have on your score. So put another way, the penalty that you get for answering an easy question incorrectly is 100 times greater than the credit you would get for answering a very hard question correctly. So the damage from easy questions is very significant compared to the benefits that you might get from a hard question. And so that's very different from college tests. The other big difference is that on the GMAT, even the easier questions have trap answers. Even the 400 level questions, they're designed in such a way that if you read it too quickly, if you miss one word, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to fall for one of the trap answers. So if you take those two pieces of information together, your conclusion should be that when I get a question that's easy for me, that I know how to solve, I need to do whatever it takes to get it right. I'll slow down, I'll triple check my work, I'll read the question one more time at the end before I submit my answer. I really, really want to make sure that I get it right. And when I get a hard question on the GMAT, a question that is hard for me, I just want to spend as little time as possible on it because it's just a waste of time and it's not going to be worth that much if it's a hard question anyway. So hopefully that's helpful, Devinder. I got another question in the chat, so I'll read it out loud. Does spending time on the front end mean that you don't read the entire question? I've tried to invest in front-end work sometimes, but realized that I've gotten ahead of the question and they were asking a tangential question to the one I thought they were asking. Or is that indicative of rushing through the front end? Fantastic question, Gloria. There are, so I've been doing this as a full-time job for 7 years, teaching the GMAT. And in my entire career, I've only seen, let's call it 5 to 10 word problems on the quant section that provide information that's kind of not necessary and would cause you to do work that you shouldn't do. That's a very small number of questions. So in other words, it's incredibly rare for a word problem to contain information that's not needed or that would take you on a bad path. For that reason, Gloria, I'm thinking that if you read the question, if you read the word problem very slowly, and then did work that took you in a direction that was not what the question wanted to ask in the end, then you probably misinterpreted the information or made some sort of computation error or something like that, unless it was one of those rare cases where that would happen. I think that when you're starting out your GMAT journey, you definitely want to really work hard on the front end because that's where the reasoning happens. And this is a test of reasoning, right? And there might be a question here or there where you overdid it or where you ended up going in the wrong path, but that's how you build that experience. And as you approach test day, as you become a GMAT veteran, you're going to be able to say, in some cases, oh, there's a piece of front-end work that I can do here. Let's not, but say I did, right? File it in the back of your mind that you could do this work here. You're not actually going to do it, but you know that you could do it if you wanted to. And that's going to be good enough once you become a GMAT veteran. It's good enough to say, oh, I could, 5 numbers, the average is 6. I could note that the sum is 30. Let's not, but say I did. And then read on and see if that becomes useful or not. So you can always go back and do the computation. In the example I gave with the average and the sum, it's simple enough that I would just do it. It doesn't take any time. But in other cases, the computation might be a bit more involved. And so I might just make a note on my scratch paper that I could do that computation if I wanted to. You know, this is the value that I would get out of the computation. In other words, here's what I would know if I did it. Let's see if I actually need to know that. And then you read on and you see, do I need to go back there? So I'm getting a request to see some examples of actual GMAT questions, and I think it is time to do that. So let's do that, and then we can go back to that slide and talk some more about the big takeaways. So here's an official GMAT problem. This is from the free starter kit on MBA.com. I'm going to give you all a minute or two to just appreciate the question. Try to enjoy the front end work to really think about what the story is describing. And then think about how you might solve it. Okay, so let's talk about this problem. This is a word problem from the quant section. Does anyone here always try to identify the question type when you first start reading a word problem? Is it important to you to identify whether it's a work rate question or a statistics question or divisibility question? Is that important to anybody? So it's interesting. So two of you are saying no. One, Gloria, is saying you probably should do it more. I actually think you should never do it. I find that for some students, when they try to do it and they fail, in other words, they read the problem and they can't neatly categorize it in one particular topic or another, then panic sets in because they feel like they should be able to, and if they can't, then like, what do I do? I don't know what to do if I can't name the question type. But the GMAT doesn't really favor people who try to kind of have a toolkit and then try to match that toolkit to the different question types. The GMAT favors people who just approach the question with a curious and open mind and just want to take it all in and think deeply about the situation. So I actually would recommend not trying to categorize the question as it pops up. So we start reading the word problem, and we probably take a little pause at the end of the first sentence with some nice natural pause. At that point, I really don't know what inferences I can make. I think a lot of people might do something like this. Let me know in the chat box if you did or if you would do that. I'm curious. Ragini did. Anybody else? Gloria did. And Elaine did. So many of you did this. This is the kind of thing where I might say, let's not, but say I did, right? I also know that these problems are not designed to test math or algebra. It's not really about that. You've already been tested on math and algebra in school. This test is designed to test reasoning. That doesn't look so much like reasoning to me. That looks more like algebra. So I probably won't do that, but I'll make a mental note that I could do it if I wanted to. So then I keep reading. And I'm curious if anyone in the chat box might want to volunteer to tell me where to stop next. As I start reading the remainder of the problem, where do I stop? Would I pause? Should I read all the way to the question mark, or is there some place before that that you think I might want to pause? Nobody wants to volunteer. Read all the way till the end, Regini says. Well, I'm not going to read all the way to the end, but thank you for participating. I appreciate that. I'm only going to read up to the word and. What kind of inference do you think I could possibly make at that point? This test is designed to test whether you're ready to go to business school, and after that you become an executive, maybe even a senior executive one day. How would a senior executive look at this problem? We want to stop thinking like analysts and start thinking like executives. I know that I have a total of 300 grams as a mixture of two different foods. And now they're telling me the percent protein of food X, one of the foods. Any thoughts? Just reading up to there. I'm not seeing anything in the chat box, so I'm going to allow you to read all the way up to here, up to the end of that sentence. Does that help anybody? Now can you tell me some interesting inference? So reading the full first two sentences of this problem, can you make any interesting inference? So Ragini says in the chat box, different foods give different percentages of protein. That is correct. It is not an inference. An inference is something that is not in the text. It's something that will require us to do some type of work. Okay. Gloria, that's a little bit better. So less food of Y will lead more protein. I'm actually thinking it's the other way around, Gloria. I'm thinking if there's more of Y, that would translate into more protein because Y has more protein than X does. Elaine says 25% of the mixture is protein. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and here's why. Actually, I'm not going to tell you why. I'm just going to ask you a question instead. I don't know how much of the 300 grams is X. I don't know how much of the 300 grams is Y. But an executive would look at that and say, well, there's got to be some sort of range. On the one extreme, I could just use only X, it would be 300 grams of X and no Y at all. And in the other extreme, I would just use Y. I would have 300 grams of Y and no X. And that way you can kind of build a range of possibilities, and then you can say that the answer must be somewhere in between. Does that seem like a reasonable action to all of you? I think you didn't think of doing it, but now that I'm proposing it, does that seem reasonable? Do you see how that might be the thing that an executive would do? So go ahead and try to do that using those first two sentences and see if you can come up with an inference. Does everybody see in the chat box what Devinder typed? He said there would be anywhere between 30 and 45 grams of protein. Everybody see that? I think that that's a much better thing to put on our scratch paper than this algebraic equation. So I see you guys cannot see what he typed in the chat, so I'll read it again. Devinder said there's going to be anywhere between 30 and 45 grams of protein in this mixture. So I'm going to draw a number line because it's a range, and I'm going to say at the minimum you're going to have 30 grams of protein, and at the maximum you're going to have 45 grams of protein. On the left side, that's if you just use X. You'd get 10% of 300. 10% protein out of 300 is 30. And here, if you're only using Y, you're going to get 45 grams of protein. Now, I forget who it was earlier who said the mixture would have 25% of protein. Do you see now why that would be illogical? Why the mixture would need to have somewhere between 10% and 15%? Because if you're just using X, okay, perfect. This is front-end work. Okay, so I mentioned I wanted to show you an example of what is front-end work. This is front-end work. This is front-end work as well, but as you get more experienced with the GMAT, you'll realize this is probably not going to be that useful to me because it's not a math test. You could solve it this way, but not in 2 minutes. This is reasoning, right? This is just pure quantitative reasoning, what we're doing here. Okay, well done, Devinder, on coming up with that range. Let me know in the chat box whether you think that you would be able to do this as well in the future. Or if you think that this is just too hard. Let me know. Don't be shy. I'm just curious to see what you all think about that. Doable? Not doable? So Elaine, thank you so much for admitting that. Can you tell me a little bit more about your concern? Why do you think that you cannot do this? what's the missing piece for you? Or what would make it more doable for you? And while Elaine hopefully types her answer, we're going to read on. Do I read on all the way to the question mark now? Yes or no? Chat box, yes or no? Do I read all the way to the question mark? Or is there some other place you would stop first? Gloria, where would you stop? Very, very good. So this is front-end work, right? We're not rushing. We're not trying to get to the question mark. My objective is never to get to the question mark. My objective is to pause and make inferences. The question mark will wait for me. Okay? I will not let the timer rush me. And hopefully we'll see that when we do get to the question mark, we'll already have the answer. There'll be nothing left to do. So what do you all think about this part of the problem that's telling us that we have a total of 38 grams? What can we do with that in the context of the range that we already set up? Where would you note the 38 grams, Gloria? Would you find it? Would you locate it on the number line and say it's, yeah, somewhere in between 30 and 45. Oh, good. So Gloria says the midpoint between 30 and 45 is 37 and a half. So then where does 38 fall? Closer to X or closer to Y? And the midpoint is right there at 37.5. Where is 38? It's a little bit closer to Y. So what do you all think we can infer from this green highlighted piece of text? What can you infer from that? The Y part is the bigger part of the mixture. That's right. And X makes less than half of the mixture, as Gloria just said. Good, good. Let's make a note of that. We just found out that Y is ever so slightly more than half of the 300 grams. And X is ever so slightly less than half of the 300 grams. That's a good inference to make at that point. Now I'm ready to read all the way to the question mark. What does the back end work look like for this problem? Very nice. So the only reasonable answer choice is B. How long does that take? Once we are already here, how long does it take to pick B? And how confident are you that it's B? Here's the difference between a GMAT problem and a math problem. If this were a math problem, the answer choices would have been 138, 139, 140, 141, 142. That's a math problem, if these were the answer choices. But on a GMAT problem, they're going to set up the answer choices in a way that allows you to just apply quantitative reasoning without doing much math. Notice the trap answer, though. You see that trap answer? This is how many grams of Y we have. And a lot of people will fall for it because they're rushing. And why are they rushing? They believe that 2 minutes is not enough. I'll pause here for questions, and then I'd like to look at a sentence correction problem. And you might be wondering, what kind of front-end work would there be in sentence correction? But we'll see. So someone is asking whether I would be able to explain how someone could solve this mathematically. And the answer is yes, I could explain it, but I won't. And the reason I won't is because this is a GMAT session, not a math session. So if I was here to teach you math, then I would just teach you math. I would show you how to do it mathematically. But that's not what we're here to do. It's just not appropriate for the GMAT to solve it mathematically. If you're curious, though, I will show you how this quantitative reasoning approach can take us all the way to the correct answer. If you just look at the ratio of the distances on either side of the average, you'll see that we have in yellow 7 and in blue 8. We know that y is winning. We know y is pulling harder because the average is closer to it. So to finish this off, we can just say y, the winner, to x, the loser, to the total, has a ratio of 8 to 7 to 15. Now we know the actual total is 300, so your unknown multiplier is 20, and we're looking for x. So it's going to be 7 times 20, 140. Okay? So you could have done that if the answer choices were like this, but they wouldn't be like this because it's the GMAT. If they were like this, you can still use quantitative reasoning rather than math. I will not show you how to solve this question algebraically because that's not the purpose of this session. As long as you're here for GMAT, I would say it's a huge mistake to use math for a question like this. Can't be done in 2 minutes. All right. So if there are no other questions, let's have a look at a sentence correction problem. If some of you have never seen a sentence correction problem before, you get a sentence at the top of the screen. Some of the sentence is underlined. Answer choice A repeats that underline, and the other answer choices have variations of that underlined part. And your job is to eliminate the answer choices that are grammatically wrong or that mess up the meaning and pick the remaining one, pick the one that's left. Okay, so I'll give you a minute and a half to work on this on your own, and then I'll come back on the microphone. Okay, let's talk about this sentence correction problem. Let me know in the chat box whether you read the original sentence all the way to the end or not. So just with a yes or no in the chat box. Did you read the original sentence all the way to the end, yes or no? Okay, so I'm getting a lot of yeses. Now, I'm curious, did anybody pay a little bit less attention to the part that I'm going to highlight now in red? I think sometimes people kind of zone out a little bit or speed up their reading for that part because it's coming in after the underline. Did anyone, let me know in the chat box if anybody kind of paid less attention to the part that I'm highlighting in red. Good, I'm liking what I'm seeing in the chat box. So this is a good group of students. We should pay even more attention to this last part, the part that comes after the underline. Because the non-underlined part, that's like your given information. Remember the previous question with the rabbit where it told us all of this information about the different foods? In sentence correction, the given info is the non-underlined text. The underlined text is just answer choice A. But the non-underlined text, that's for all of the answer choices. And when you have, sometimes the underline goes all the way to the end of the sentence. But if the underline stops and then you have a non-underlined text at the end, that's almost always going to be the most important thing on the computer screen. I'm going to repeat that. If there is a non-underlined chunk of text after the underline, that chunk of text in the end is probably the most important thing on the computer screen because a lot of students just kind of stop reading there or zone out and stop paying attention. But that's where we're going to have hints. And for this particular question, can anyone identify one or two hints in the highlighted part that help us eliminate answer choices or that help us pick a particular answer choice? Anybody? Please use the chat box. So I'm getting a really, really good answer from Sean. Sean is highlighting this part. Sean, which answer choices can you eliminate thanks to this part that I just highlighted in green? What answer choices can you eliminate? And looks like Vibav, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Vibav is answering for you. We can eliminate CDE thanks to the green because of parallelism. If I have and with, I need to have with. Okay, I'm not going to go into the grammar rules here because that's not what we're here for, but there's a rule called parallelism, and if you have a with after the word and, you need to have a with beforehand. Very good. And I think I saw the other important hint from Natalie Lewis. Thank you very much for that. So Natalie noticed, I'm going to use a different color here. She noticed the word are, which I'm highlighting here in blue. Natalie, which answer choices can we eliminate thanks to the word are? We can eliminate A. Anything else? Very good. Eliminate A and D thanks to the word are. And look at that, we only have one remaining answer choice left standing. So what is the front end work in sentence correction? Maybe I can get some of you to type it in the chat box. How would you describe front end work in sentence correction? Thank you, Gloria. Looking at the answer choices to see where there are splits. So that's good. I would consider that front end work. Although I would try to not spend a lot of time on that. I would really just glance at the beginnings of the answer choices. If the answer choices are very long, I'm not going to look at all of the splits among them, but certainly this is a good split to notice early on. The other piece of front-end work in sentence correction is really paying a lot of attention to the non-underlined text and looking for hints in that non-underlined text. And Natalie did a great job there, and I think it was Sean did a great job there. Okay. I'll open it up to questions. We have 10 minutes left. And in fact, what I'll do is I'll pull us back to this slide. What questions do folks have? Maybe I'll talk a little bit about number 4 as I wait for questions to come in. On test day or on a practice test, you might find yourself behind. You might find that you're worried that you're behind. Right? Maybe you're not actually behind, but you're worried. What do you do? What do you do when the timer gets to you? What do you do when you're starting to panic a little bit and you're worried that you're running out of time? What do you do? I'll tell you what I think you should do. I think you should do whatever it takes to not be worried about time anymore. Maybe that means that you just need to put your dry erase marker down on the desk, lean back in your chair, close your eyes, and take a deep breath like this. Maybe that's what it takes. Maybe you need to guess on the question in front of you and guess on the next question without even reading it. Maybe that's what you need to do in order to relax. Do it. Do whatever it takes. Because if you try to solve questions while in a state of panic, you're not going to do a good job in the front end work. You're just going to spend time on back end work, and you might as well just go home. You're not going to perform to the best of your ability if you're letting the timer get to you. That's why it's so important to not start timing yourself until you're ready for it. And you're not ready for it if the timer is causing you to skip this. Okay. Devinder is asking for another example of a more difficult question. Unfortunately, we won't have time for that tonight, Devinder. But there are a lot of great examples in the official guide, 2018 edition. And that's not our book, so it's not like I'm trying to sell you something. That's from MBA.com. Any questions on how to manage your time? I know that there are a lot of timing strategies out there where you can mark up numbers on your scratch paper and then compare those numbers to the timer. I'm not a big fan of those timing strategies because they all require that I look at the timer every few questions. And I don't know if any of you are like me, but for me, when I look at the timer, it causes me to feel like I have to rush, even if I'm doing okay. Let me know in the chat box if that's happened to you as well. Like you look at the timer, you realize I'm okay, but the act of looking, the act of checking the timer made you feel like you have to rush, right? So I don't like those strategies where you have to keep checking the timer every few questions. I'd rather just check the timer maybe once, maybe twice per section. But in order to be able to do that, you have to take a lot of practice tests. And in those practice tests, you have to really focus on the front end work. And if you do that, you're not going to run out of time. And then you'll build that confidence and you say, well, I really don't need 62 minutes for the quant section. That's more than I need. I really don't need 65 minutes for the verbal section. That's more than I need. And when you prove that to yourself in a few practice tests, then you're going to be much more comfortable going into the test center and not worrying about the timer. Yeah, you check it one time, maybe halfway through, just to make sure everything is fine. If everything is not fine, throw away a couple of questions. Right? Do whatever you have to do to not panic and to not let the timer get to you and cause you to miss the front end work. I'll tell you a quick story. This is a true story of one of my colleagues. A few years ago, she went into the test center and purposely got the first 7 questions wrong in quant and in verbal. So 14 questions wrong, but the first 7 in each section. She didn't guess them. She actually solved them and then purposely picked the wrong answer. And she got a 750 on that test. And the reason I'm telling you the story is because I really don't want you to feel like it's the end of the world if you have to throw a couple of questions away. In fact, maybe that's the best strategy. It's certainly the best strategy if you're panicking. If you're in a state of panic, you can't do anything. There's no way to do any quantitative reasoning or verbal reasoning if you're panicking. So if you need to throw away a couple of questions to help yourself relax and feel like you have the time, then do so. It's absolutely worth it. So Tim is asking, how often and when should you start to do full practice exams? I'm not comfortable with doing full practice exams if they're going to cause me to skip the front end work. So I would say if that happens, start them from question number 6, or start them from question number 8, or start them from question number 10, whichever question will allow you to not rush the front end work. As long as you're not rushing the front end work, you can start them as soon as you want. There's no reason to delay taking practice tests unless it's going to cause you to get into this bad habit of skipping the front end work. How often should you take a practice exam? I would say ideally twice a month, no more than twice a month. But if you're in a very tight timeline and the test is coming up and you haven't taken enough practice tests, I think it's okay to do 1 a week. So 1 per week is the maximum frequency that I would recommend. And ideally, I would say 2 practice tests per month. Doing a practice test doesn't increase your GMAT score. Making mistakes on the practice test and then learning from those mistakes on the practice test, that increases your GMAT score. Aside from that, the only reason to do a practice test is to practice working with a timer and not allowing that timer to influence your front-end work, and then practicing your stamina. But outside of those 2 things, and I guess also practicing the ability to identify when a question is too hard for you and then letting go of that question. So those are all very important things for the GMAT, but those are really the only reasons why you need to take practice tests. So Gloria is asking, how often can you count on reasoning for data sufficiency? Sometimes you try to use logic, but you miss out an outlier that you should have tested. So Gloria, I would actually say that when you're testing cases, you're probably not using reasoning or logic. Because if you were using reasoning or logic, you wouldn't need to test cases. Okay. Now, there are a few data sufficiency questions where you have to test cases. Those are typically the situations where there's a limited number of cases. So for example, if there are only 10 possible cases, then yeah, you might need to test them. But in most data sufficiency questions, if you're going to test cases, you'll realize there's an infinite number of possible cases. And under those circumstances, if you do a good job reasoning, then you wouldn't need to test cases in the first place. So what I recommend is when you see questions like that and you're testing cases, ask yourself, well, how can I use logic here such that I wouldn't need to test cases in the first place? And that's really the only way to improve, because if you tested cases and got the right answer, you didn't learn anything from it. Does that make sense? I'm curious how folks would react to that. So my argument here is that if you have a data sufficiency question at home, and it's an infinite number of possible cases, and you tested cases and got the right answer or got the wrong answer, either way, you didn't actually get any smarter out of as a result of it. You didn't improve your reasoning ability. You didn't improve your understanding of the concept that they're testing here. You practiced testing cases, and that's worth something, but that's not really going to push your GMAT score up. All right. So a few takeaways for you all from this hour that we spent together. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't finished reading the slide, just pause and finish reading it. Take your time. For those of you who are here, I will come back to the slide if you need me to. And this is our last slide for the day. So I hope you all enjoyed it and got something out of it. I'll stick around for a couple more minutes to answer any questions, but I will stop the recording here. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.